I'm going to introduce each speaker in turn, so as just before each of the sessions. So we're going to start with some speakers from Newcastle University Special Collections, a talk entitled Special for Everyone, Embedding EDI at Newcastle University Special Collections, particularly focusing on a multi-stranded project to address EDI, looking at developing and applying signposting for difficult and problematic materials in the collections there. And I'm really pleased to welcome Geraldine Hunwick, who's the Senior Archivist in Special Collections at Newcastle University. Geraldine was to have been joined by her colleague Ian Johnson, who's Head of Special Collections and Archives. Unfortunately, Ian is unwell today, but we're really delighted to welcome you, Geraldine, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Geraldine Hunwick. Hello, everybody. I'm Senior Archivist at Newcastle University Special Collections. As Christopher has said, I was to be joined today by Ian, our Head of Special Collections, but sadly he's unwell, so you've just got me. So I will outline, I'm going to talk about our multi-stranded project, Special for Everyone, which has been a project to address EDI in special collections here at Newcastle. So I'm going to outline some of the project's engagement work to illuminate hidden voices and narratives in our collections, and also then the work that we've carried out in the project to develop and apply signposting for difficult and problematic material in the collections. Ian was then going to talk specifically about the outputs of work that we've done with Dr. Lucy Havens to apply machine learning models to identify gender bias in our archival catalogues metadata descriptions, thanks to a research and innovation grant from TNA. I can only give a brief overview of that work today because Ian has more in-depth knowledge. I haven't been involved directly in that particular piece of work. So I can give you a brief overview, but I would also refer you to Lucy's previous talk in this seminar series earlier on in her work on that. And that's available obviously in the on-demand area of this seminar series online. And Ian and Lucy did talk about it at the recent DCDC conference. So possibly in the proceedings of that once they're available as well. Okay, so without further ado, I will move on. So just for a little bit of background, like all of us here, I think, our work around contending transparently and openly with equality, diversity and inclusion in our collections and curation is something that certainly was catalysed by the Black Lives Matter movement, but it actually really predated that as aspirational thinking for us, in terms of how we can celebrate diversity in the collections, how we want to be transparent about the content in the collections that doesn't represent contemporary values, and how, thinking about how we extricate ourselves from propagating very top-down narratives and even glorifying individuals who, like most individuals, are morally complex at the very least. Obviously, our sector has advocated for this, and indeed this very session is inspired by, as we've said, RLUK's Special Collections and Heritage Network's EDI position paper on the subject. But like most universities, Newcastle's also encouraged and fostered initiatives, I'd say, in a very grassroots way, with its overarching EDI strategy. A few little kind of extracts from it are there on the screen. So, specifically for the library, there was lots of potential for special collections there. And we were sponsored, Special Collections was sponsored by our Deputy Vice Chancellor in 2020 to initiate what was really an umbrella programme of work, which we called Special for Everyone. And this encompassed several strands of work based around visibility in collections, inclusive collection development, supporting decolonisation work, and work around institutional memory and university legacies. Work across the project was underpinned throughout, or where possible, by partnership working and also, very importantly, student engagement. And yeah, the student voice was very important in our kind of conception of what we wanted to do. So on screen here is just the overarching aim of the project as we conceived it back then. And that was to amplify and be more transparent about equality, diversity and inclusion themes in the collections. And then they're the two main ways that we saw that we would carry out that work. So addressing the presence of problematic, difficult material in the collections, and also, very importantly, we wanted to also illuminate and create new pathways into the hidden or less visible voices and narratives and histories, some of which may also be difficult ones, of course. Okay, so I'll just give a roundup of some of the kind of engagement work that we did, and then I'll go on to talk about the collection signposting work. So the project produced several, well, it produced a programme of exhibitions focusing on EDI within the collections. So finding their voices here, that was primarily a showcase of items and material which especially had come to light through the various strands of work on the project, and especially through the audit of collections that we carried out, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. So that was a kind of multi-themed exhibition in the library. And then actually what actually turned out to be probably our most successful exhibition to date, actually, in terms of footfall and feedback, was Listen to This Story. So this was an exhibition which was exploring the Black British experience in children's literature and the struggles and successes of Black British authors in representing their world. This was a partnership with Karen Sands O'Connor, an academic in our School of English Literature, Linguistics and Literature, Seven Stories Centre for Children's Books, and also Newcastle Libraries, for this was a multi-site exhibition as well. And we also had a student intern working on that as well. And yeah, that won one of the university's Engagement and Place Awards. So we felt it had quite a wide and an impactful reach for one of our exhibitions. We were also represented on the university's attempts to contextualise our campus and its history. So, for example, having your main university building named after an arms dealer and Lord Armstrong, and then with a statue of Martin Luther King in its courtyard, perhaps needed a little bit of nuancing. So we were able to help with at least putting that into a context through our archives, in particular the university's institutional archive. We also sat on a working group from across the university and with some external members, examining how our university can address its institutional histories and legacies. Another example being a contentious financial donation to the College of Science, one of the predecessor bodies of the university, by King Leopold II of Belgium, who committed many atrocities towards people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So yeah, we've been instrumental in supporting that work where we can with the institutional archive under the umbrella of our broader project. We've also revised our collection development policy as part of this broad multi-stranded project, and we've deliberately, on the back of that, begun to sort more marginalised or material that represents more marginalised voices and communities. So such as our campaign for homosexual equality archive, which is very heavily used already, we're happy to say. And another example being the archive of Open Clasp, a women's theatre company based in Newcastle upon Tyne, whose primary aim is to work with women and young children on the margins of society to create innovative theatre productions. So yeah, that's sort of collection development, big part of in looking at how we can be more inclusive in that. And yeah, it's following on from the exhibitions and making things more visible, really. We also have sort of pushed out more content, created and pushed out more content relating to the more marginalised voices and and histories and narratives in the collections. Again, particularly those that perhaps came to light through the work that we've done on the project and through the audit of collections. So yeah, trying to push out more engaging content. There's just a couple of examples on the screen there, and things that we think are sort of ripe for perhaps more research or exploitation. Okay, so but we really didn't want this whole project to be just a one-off standalone time-bound project or piece of work. We wanted it and needed it to be programmatic and embedded within our practices. So to that end, with a lot of student input and interrogation also of our team's tacit knowledge of our collections, it must be said, a major strand of work has been the creation of signposting to add to our catalogues, both as a means of flagging difficult or problematic content where issues might exist for our users, and also to celebrate the diversity in our collections, where, as I say, that might be ripe for further, where material might be ripe for further research and discovery. Our approach to this is outlined here on screen. So research to identify emerging practices, and then development of an in-house methodology. Our methodology centred around auditing our collection finding aids, and then the collection content itself. So we did that by focusing on the characteristics for which communities have experienced and do experience systemic discrimination and marginalisation, namely race, disability, gender, sexuality, religion or belief, age and social class. So we used those because they were kind of recurring themes when we looked around at how other people were starting to approach this kind of work. We saw those as kind of providing a useful structure, if you like, for our audit. We had 2 postgraduate students with some dedicated time to work on the project. And so we created a sort of a way of them to go through and fine-comb our finding aids for actual difficult content in the finding aids themselves, but also to use the finding aids as a springboard, as well as tacit knowledge that we gathered from the team, to take a deep dive into the collections to see actually what was in there. And they had that dedicated time and space to do that, and to log anything that they felt was either something we wanted to draw further attention to because it had potential for further research, or material that was difficult and needed more contextualisation and signposting. So we worked up, what we've ended up with is a service level or high level statement, which lays out our position on this work, why we've done it, what the reasons are, what the kind of context is for doing it, the broader context, and also talking about the limitations of it. It is subjective work in the end, it always will be. It can't be comprehensive because our collections are so, there is so much information in there. But what we can do is embed it as a mindset going forward for the way we curate our collections and think about them and describe them. So we have a service level, high level statement that will soon go live on our web pages, and also a set of, we've got collection level statements, and we will be eventually putting some item level ones as well. So there's an example here on screen. As you can see, it's a demo that our excellent IT colleagues have done for us. So this is how it will look. This is how kind of a collection level description will look in our online catalogues. You can see this one's got 2 types of description statement. It's got what's a sort of content warning statement at the top, if you like, signposting material that's potentially difficult, problematic, and then also on the side panel there, we've got what we've given a working title throughout the project of celebration statement. So that's kind of what we've called these, which is pulling out material that's of interest that kind of is linked with those themes and those characteristics that we've talked about. Some collections will have just one or the other of these. Some might have none, of course, but that's how it's going to look. We're kind of poised now to make those live, just probably within the next month or so. we'll make the statement live and upload the catalogue statements as well. But this has been a very interesting part of the process. We did consult through the university about the wording of these statements. So we engaged with high-level stakeholders in the university to tell them about what we're trying to achieve with this work, our methodology, and and through that, our statements, the way they started off, had to undergo revision, and that's specifically in light of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which came into force, I'm sure we're all aware, on the 1st of August, and through the dialogue that we've had around that with our university's designated officer for freedom of speech. So this is now obviously an important agenda for the university, and it has a legal obligation to secure freedom of speech within the law and to protect academic freedom, even if the speech is controversial or offensive. So therefore, talking about concepts of offence or offensiveness, which is where we started off, became problematic in itself. So we've ended up having to take a more nuanced approach, focusing on the potential of material to cause discomfort or distress rather than to cause offence. Fortunately for us, we just happened to be at a stage with this work where it coincided with the rollout of university policy and practice around this new legislation, just at the time that we were needed to consult with stakeholders in the university. So we've not found ourselves in a position of having to backtrack on anything that we'd already made live and having to revise anything like that. So the work we've done on it's taken quite a long time, partly because it's been done on a very part-time basis. And so it's interesting to see and reflect on how changes in the political landscape over the last 5 years are now having a bearing on the work that we started doing and the approach we took 5 years ago. Okay, I think I've just got 5 minutes left, which is probably about right, because this is the part that I would have passed over to Ian for. So I'll just give you a very, very brief overview of this work. So yes, Ian was going to talk about the gender bias work that's been done with Dr. Lucy Havens. Obviously, for special collections, a huge boon for us is the whole area of digital scholarship and being able to use things like AI and machine readable content in a sort of collaborative, interdisciplinary nature in the field of digital scholarship. And we have lots of those kind of projects on the boil. But a couple of years ago, one of our archivists attended a digital humanities conference and met and saw and heard Dr. Lucy Havens talking about her work on developing the tools for detecting gender bias in archival catalogues. And we realised that this was a great opportunity. It fell in nicely within our Special for Everyone project and its aims, and also into the field of digital humanities, digital scholarship that we're very interested in working in. So yeah, we got in touch with Lucy, and she was thankfully up for a collaboration, which has been done with the help of the National Archives Research and Innovation Grant. So Lucy developed for her PhD research, I'll just move on, models to investigate gender biases in our archival catalogues. So her models are the first machine learning models developed specifically to study biases in archival catalogues, metadata descriptions. So having trained her models already with a data set of catalogue metadata descriptions from University of Edinburgh's archives, Lucy, through our project, then applied her models to metadata descriptions from Newcastle University's archival catalogues. So specifically, the test classification models that Lucy has developed annotate or label instances of gendered and gender biased language in a data set of text. And this enables measurements of gender bias at a high level, considering the representation of different genders across an entire catalogue, and at a low level, considering the word choice of individual descriptions that misrepresent or exclude certain people or communities. And yeah, focusing on two types of gender bias, that's omission and stereotyping, two examples of that there on screen. The methodology, just very basic there, just briefly, set 11 of our archive catalogues were selected, and Lucy extracted and transformed the descriptive metadata from them. Approximately 2.8 million words across 27,235 descriptions we looked at, and classified the resulting data set with the models that she had worked up. And then also part of that was to manually evaluate the descriptive metadata for gender bias. So firstly, without seeing the models classifications, and then while seeing the models classifications. Very briefly, the results. The manual review found gender bias in only 50 out of the 27,235 descriptions, which amounts to just 0.18%. But the models classified 2,000 to 3,000 descriptions as being gender biased. So that's interesting and displays the effectiveness. Obviously, I can't talk about it in more detail, but the effectiveness of the models. Sometimes a disagreement between models and manual reviewers is an explanation. Other times the models might have made a mistake as well. But I think, just to say there was then comparative analysis as well. So can we identify distinct linguistic patterns in the two data sets? And also then exploratory analysis of Newcastle's descriptive metadata. So are there other ways that gender biases are communicated in the language? So I can't go into more detail on this, but that I would refer you to Lucy's work and what was said at the recent DC conference. I've kept this slide in for me, and I think it's just a caveat that I think this is an example that wouldn't have been caught by the models. So because it's not omission and it's not stereotyping, but it's another example of gender bias. So it can't be 100% effective. There will still be things that may not get picked up. And very quickly, possible assumptions based on the findings. Possibly the lack of gender bias that was found is a reflection of the relatively recent professionalisation of archives. That over the last few decades, we've become more professionalised. We're using standards and thinking more about how we describe our collections and thinking about that in a more standardised way and generally. Than say more than a few decades ago and beyond. And our more product-less process approach that certainly has been taken here at Newcastle. Again, we're perhaps just being leaner in our descriptions and there's less room for gender bias as possible. And just possible uses of this, the value of the work, to do a retrospective health check of our finding aids, using it as a catalogue diagnostic tool, and also more mindful cataloguing as an inclusive exercise. And that's definitely something that, as part of our Special for Everyone project, at the end of all of this, we want to have, embedded a different mindset really in terms of how we think about and curate and talk about our collections. Thank you very much. And that's all from me. I'll just stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Some great work, really interesting presentation, lots of initiatives there for us to reflect on. And as you'll see in the comment in the chat, if you've got any questions about Geraldine's presentation, then do put those in the Q&A. So without further ado, we'll move on to our next speakers. This is a presentation from the University of Leeds on queer perspectives in the archives, exploring the outputs of an LGBTQ+ internship. And for this session, we're going to hear from Rosaline Williams, who's an MA student in art gallery and museum studies at the University of Leeds. And this is presented as a pre-recording, which we'll play for you in a moment. But Rosaline is accompanied live on this webinar by Holly Smith, who's also going to introduce the session and be around for the Q&A at the end. So Holly is an archivist at the University of Leeds Cultural Collections, where her work has particularly focused on inclusive cataloguing, representation in archives and trauma-informed archival practice. And this year, Holly has been the line manager for the LGBTQ plus internship. So over to you, Holly. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to be here just to intro Rosaline's lovely presentation. So I'll let her take away in a minute or two, but just for a bit of context. Yes, so I'm Holly Smith and I'm an archivist at Cultural Collections and Galleries at the University of Leeds. And like Christopher said, this year I line managed our LGBTQ plus intern, lovely Rosaline. So like we've already said, this talk is going to be a pre-recorded presentation from Rosaline, who will take you through her research and the work she did with us during her internship. So as context for that, Rosaline was doing a 350-hour internship, which was completed within 6 months. So this worked out at around 2 days a week, more or less, for just about that 6-month period. And Rosaline really became quite an integrated part of our team during that time, which was lovely. You'll have seen her on our socials, and yeah, she was kind of a part of day-to-day life, which was lovely. We've had a couple of internships before Rosaline. So the first came about when a student tried to find LGBTQ plus stories in our university's archive, and basically didn't find much at all, which I'm sure we're all aware of that context. So in response to this, our first intern explored our university archive and researched how best to label the queer narratives that they did manage to find in some of our student magazines and things like that. So this involved focus groups around terminology, and there was a real focus on that subject tagging approach, and also, of course, drawing a heavy attention to the glaring gaps in our collections as well. The next internship continued this work of surfacing stories and tagging, and also looked at creating links with current LGBTQ plus societies on our campus to kind of look at current and future collecting as well. So then Rosaline's internship came around, and as you'll hear from her, she was kind of focusing on something a little bit different. It was looking at stuff that kind of doesn't neatly fit into an LGBTQ plus subject tag. It's that idea of queer possibility in collections and encouraging researchers to have a queer perspective when they're looking at a range of stuff, so from different subjects, time periods, and things like that. So this involved a lot of research, and Rosaline truly went above and beyond. She created an amazing report and a load of different outputs that I'm sure she'll tell you about in her presentation. But I'll be around at the end, like Christopher said, to answer any questions you might have, provide any further context. Yeah, so I'll see you at the end, but I'll let you now listen to Rosaline explain for herself what her internship was about.
Hi everyone, my name's Rosaline. Thanks so much for having me on this seminar. Sorry to not be there in person, but for the past 6 months or so, have been working as the LGBTQ plus intern at Cultural Collections and Galleries at Leeds University Library. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the role has entailed and the sort of outputs from the project. So coming into the role, the main ideas were to focus on grey area collection material with LGBT narratives and how that collection material could possibly be catalogued or used in more accessible ways for researchers to be able to utilise. So it came under kind of 3 different things. Research, which encompassed a lot of like queer theory, looking at how other archives catalogue or describe their collections, whether they might use things like tagging or research guides, and also looking at how other historians or researchers have used archival material to develop queer histories, and then using the collections as well. So looking at past LGBT internships, the discoveries that have been made there, and also internal kind of diversity document within the archives, and through sort of finding theory and research, have been able to kind of identify some more collection material, which is really exciting, some of which is sort of canonical to queer history, some of which perhaps has the ability to be interpreted through a queer lens. So off the top of my head, something like Shakespeare, we have his first folios. But to be honest, even if something is part of canonical queer history, often it does have that grey area attached to it still, because a lot of the history of sexuality and gender is ambiguous and requires a researcher to sort of read between the lines or examine kind of possibilities rather than concrete evidence. And then the outputs have been sort of a range of blog posts about collection finds, things like Lesbian Visibility Day, focused on the ladies of Llangollen, Transgender Day of Visibility, with the possibly transgender Roman Emperor Elagabalus. We have some of their coins in our collection. And for LGBT History Month, looked at Aludo Equiano through a sort of queer lens, as they were a celebrated figure that month. And also some research spotlights as well. So because this is a university archive, it has these sort of unique qualities, I guess, that there's like a sort of online website where there is a focus on the research capabilities of collections. So I've been able to create one about queer medievalisms, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. So looking at archival collections, so yeah, previously mentioned that they've been used for different kind of celebration days, but yeah, also looking at how other archives use collections, but every institution is obviously different. So if you're comparing something like the National Archives, which may have more emphasis on LGBT history in terms of sort of criminality and reports, in comparison to something like the Globe Theatre, where you'll be looking at queer readings of stories. So those are just like interesting sort of like themes. Something else that comes up a lot is the kind of issue of language, use of the LGBTQ+ acronym in comparison to the word queer. So, you know, queer has a kind of historical rooting in being a slur, but as a sort of academic word, it can be really useful, and using it as a sort of a verb, like to queer the archive, and that encompasses like all sorts of things. So, you know, you're basically kind of wanting to disrupt normative ideas of history by looking at queer theory within archival material. And these kind of debates about language are sort of, I guess they don't really have a right or a wrong answer. It can be quite difficult, I guess, to apply modern terminology to past historical figures, especially if we don't know how these figures identified. And of course, you know, most of the LGBT acronym are words from the 20th century. I think the oldest is lesbian, so that dates back to the 17th century, interestingly. But before the 20th century, you won't be able to find many records, you know, described with the word transgender or gay. So also, this kind of archival research requires a clever use of the catalogue and the limitations of a catalogue, of which, you know, every archive has those limitations that are conducive to its creation and historical period and institution. So with identifying collections and sort of incorporating them into a queer history, there's a few ways I've kind of tried to think about this. So if that historical figure identified themselves being LGBT, then that's kind of perfect. That's a given. And if there is sort of solid evidence that this person sort of displayed or carried out particular behaviours that people today may be able to identify with, then again, that you know, is a sort of easier way of thinking about it. But obviously, not everything has straightforward answers. So if things can be interpreted through a queer lens, then they also might have the ability to sort of enter this canon. So I've been reading a lot about sort of medieval manuscripts, for example, and the sort of queering of them, and looking at perhaps archival sources that at first glance you wouldn't necessarily think have queer narratives, but through applying different ideas, you can kind of get a sense of maybe the social and cultural period of which that collection item might have been made, which might be able to tell you something about the way that society viewed relationships or marriage or sex, for example. So using the actual collections is another kind of issue. So I would say that actually you kind of have to take collections through a sort of case-by-case basis. There's pros and cons for all sorts of approaches. And I think when I was talking previously about being clever using the catalogue and sort of disrupting the sort of binaries and neutrality of archiving, that can be a really sort of helpful way for researchers or users of an archive to find material. And you can help visitors by doing that through using things like research collection guides, which maybe explain why the archive is set up the way it is, why the cataloguing describes things in a certain way, the use of historical language to you know, find collections. And it's the same with things like biographies and blog posts. These things allow a bit more nuance for grey area collection material. Things like tagging are also really valuable, and the issue with sort of long-winded descriptions like biographies or collection guides is that not everyone might read them and not everyone might be able to find them. So making the most user-friendly way of accessing materials is, you know, to be encouraged. So tagging can be great, but of course that does bring up that issue of applying modern terminology to past historical figures, whether things are appropriate. And again, keep going back to the sort of medieval era, but the idea of sort of queer sex in a society unlike our own might have encompassed, you know, things that we would think of as heteronormative now. So sex outside of marriage was considered sodomy in medieval Europe, for example. But you wouldn't necessarily associate that with being queer today. Other sort of digital outreach like social media and videos can be really helpful to sort of like bring engagement and allow people to feel welcome and safe in archives as well. I mean, I think that's a kind of key thing driving this project is accessibility and making sure that, you know, this history appears available for all people. And on a similar vein, like digitization, I think can be a really valuable resource because, you know, archives and library institutions, they hold this knowledge, and, you know, one great way of making it more accessible to more audiences is digitizing it and, you know, uploading those digital images to the catalogue so anyone can view them and you don't have to actually physically visit the research centre. And again, with the archive that I've been lucky enough to work with. It's been attached to the university, which also has its own exhibition spaces and galleries. So the kind of public programming and sort of programming for students allows a lot of accessibility to these collections as well. So that's just like another output that I think has a lot of value. So yeah, coming to my medieval project now, this has sort of traversed the collections looking for clues of queerness and queer possibilities, particularly in medieval manuscripts, are looking at saints and the lives of saints, the lives of monarchs, and poetry, or sort of epic poetry, chivalric romance from this time period that has maybe homoerotic undertones, and also just sort of looking in general at works that may uncover how medieval people viewed sex. So things like the document Malleus Maleficarum, which is about witchcraft and women. These things are often entangled with lesbian history and accusations of like heresy and mysticism. So that's been like a really interesting project that's sort of gone cross collections, you know, through coins and archival material. So yeah, been very enjoyable. And the second sort of larger project that's come out of this has been looking at collections of Sappho, who is a Greek poet from the Isle of Lesbos, ancient Greek poet. And we have some of her translations in the archive, notably the first English translation by Ambrose Phillips in 1711. But what's interesting about Sappho is that her name also came to be used as a descriptor of lesbian or lesbian-like activity from the 17th century onwards. So I've also been able to sort of trace that through archival material that we have in the collections, particularly this 4-part poem called Toast, within an ode to Myra by William King, who describes Lady Frances Brudenell as a Sapphic witch. It was quite interesting. And then that went all the way through to the modern day and looking at modern archives, such as Feminist Archive North, who have a collection of magazines called Lesbian Feminist Voice, Sappho. So yeah, that was really exciting project. And this is the magazine here, and that's just a picture of Sappho. So it's definitely a passion project for me that I really always loved her poetry. Unfortunately, no contemporary images of her, but it just adds to that kind of mystery. Something else about her is that a lot of her work was lost in the 10th century, so only sort of fragments of her poetry survive today, which is a kind of, I guess, like an interesting metaphor for queer history in general, that so much is lost or waiting to be uncovered. However, you know, archives do hold a really interesting amount of collections that can be utilised to create this queer history. So yeah, just ending on these sort of key debates and challenges. Something I've come across a lot is the use of sort of privacy or representation, and sort of the balance between the two. Using tagging or descriptions or something else, depending on the collection item, the use of language, class representation, which I think is a big thing. I mean, in lots of archives, particularly because what has been stored and recorded are from people that could either read and write or were wealthy enough to be deemed worthy of keeping records of. So the, you know, historical record of the ordinary lives of people is limited, but you know, like I've mentioned, that there is a way that you can kind of maybe get a sense of how different societies through history viewed these, you know, sexuality and gender. and, you know, ultimately that it's a space of silence, and how we fill that needs to be representative and, you know, appropriate to modern day communities. So that's always a kind of, you know, a question that's like important to ask. And these are just some key readings that have really helped me source material and understand, you know, queer theory in relation to archives, that I'll leave on there. But yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Many thanks to Holly and particularly to Rosaline for that really interesting presentation there on the possibilities of our archives and our collections. So moving on now to our final speakers in this webinar on a session on inclusive thinking using collaborative methods to engage different audiences with difficult collections. And really pleased to welcome two colleagues from University College London. First, Sarah Aitchison, who's Director of Special Collections at UCL, who manages a team with specialisms in archives, rare books and records management, academic support, teaching, outreach, conservation, digitisation and reader services, with 30 years of experience in higher education archives. And Sarah's joined by Erica Delbecq, who is Head of Rare Books and Academic Liaison at UCL. So thank you, colleagues at UCL. Over to you.
Thank you, Christopher. Could I have the next slide, please? Right, so what we're going to be talking about in our case study today is we're going to be mostly focusing on the Prejudice in Power project at UCL, which we're just concluding, which focuses on our collections relating to eugenics. We're also going to talk about some of the wider activity this project is feeding into. And then it says questions here, but at the end there will be a chance for you to ask questions to all of the speakers. Just a word of warning before we get started. The presentation addresses eugenics and its legacies, and as such it will refer to conversations about racism, colonialism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and class warfare. Next slide, please. Before we can talk about the Prejudice in Power project, it is necessary to give some historical context on eugenics and its history at UCL. So what is eugenics? The term literally means good breeding, and it was coined in 1883 by the Victorian polymath Sir Francis Galton to describe, and I'm quoting from Galton here, the science which deals with all influences which improve the inborn qualities of a race. Galton was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and he began to apply Darwin's theories of natural selection to the human race. Concerns over the size and fitness of the population were not new, and the backdrop for the growth of eugenics was a period of enormous social and economic change. Eugenicists believed that they were applying scientific solutions to social problems. Most of Galton's own practical eugenic suggestions were for so-called positive eugenics, which is the improvement of the race by encouraging those couples deemed worthy to have larger families. However, others were more interested in negative eugenics, seeking by various means to control the reproduction of the quote-unquote unfit. Such ideas were widely taken up by social scientists, politicians, and other public figures. Eugenic thinking influenced some of the worst crimes in human history, and it is still present in the racism, ableism, homophobia, and reproductive controls we see today. Next slide, please. The early history of eugenics in the UK is interwoven with the history of UCL. Francis Galton established the Eugenics Record Office in 1904. When in 1907 he stepped down as its director, the office was reconstituted as part of UCL. The statistician Carl Pearson accepted Galton's request to take over. Pearson renamed it the Galton Laboratory for National Eugenics, and he became the first Galton Professor of Eugenics at UCL. Pearson's eugenic ideas were based on a racist pseudoscience that called for the creation of, and I'm quoting from Pearson here, a homogeneous white race whose fertility shall markedly dominate that of the black. Pearson held similar views on discouraging reproduction amongst what he called the unthrifty, the mentally defective, the criminal, the tramp, and the congenital pauper. And he insisted that the right to live did not confer the right to reproduce. Many UCL researchers contributed to the academic work behind the movement. Over time, and especially after the Second World War, when eugenics became tainted by association with the genocidal consequences of Nazi race signs, there was increased opposition at UCL to eugenic ideologies. Not only were eugenics proposals picked apart on many scientific grounds, but those proposals also lost preferment as a course of action compared with alternatives, such as improved education, exercise, better nutrition, and improved living conditions. The Galton Laboratory was renamed the Department of Human Genetics and Biometry in 1966. Next slide, please. In 2018, UCL's previous president and provost, Professor Michael Arthur, commissioned an inquiry to look at UCL's historical role in the history of eugenics, as well as the current status of UCL's benefit from any financial instruments linked to the study of eugenics. The inquiry's report and recommendations were published in 2020 and accepted in principle by the university. And in January 2021, UCL issued a formal public apology for its history and legacy of eugenics as part of a range of actions to acknowledge and address its historical links with the eugenics movement. This included funding for a range of programs responding to the legacy, including a 3-year eugenics legacy cultural program. Named Prejudice in Power, it responds to UCL's historic role in promoting eugenics and aims to examine its legacies in a contemporary context. And I will now hand over to Sarah to talk about the project in a bit more detail.
And we're on the next slide, please. Apologies, we had some technical issues, which is why we are acting as if we're in a COVID inquiry here. But really, the Prejudice in Power project is like a small part of the response to that inquiry. And there were various aims that got put together. So really what we wanted to do was I've listed them all here. I'm not going to read them all to you, but basically take a critical look at the history of eugenics and look at how those linked into current structural inequalities. And we wanted to work with communities of people who have been or would have been, but also have been in modern times affected by lived experience of eugenic thought. And we wanted to do some kind of creative response. So rather than a kind of look back at the history, we wanted to do that, but also try and create some new activities, some new responses and some new conversations. We also wanted to do that with the basis of using our collections. So we wanted it to be something where we were using items that we held to prompt different thinking or more inclusive thinking, or just create a kind of a different kind of collaboration. And then the aim was to do those projects and then to use it to raise awareness, most especially at UCL, within its staff and students, but in wider society as well. So that's what we were aiming to do. Could we have the next one, please? So we have a plethora of collections that relate to this topic at UCL. So first of all, we've got the standard kind of named archives. So we have the archives of Francis Galton, we have the archives of Carl Pearson, Ronald Fisher, and many, many more. Those have been available for about a decade. They're all catalogued and digitised and online. But what we hadn't really looked at, and this is what came out in inquiry, was UCL's own institutional archive. So we have records obviously dating back to foundation in 1826. And then we have all of the records of the lab and the finances and kind of all of the committee minutes around the various decisions that were made at the turn of the century. So we had all of those as well. And then we also have rare book collections, which Erica knows a lot more about than me, but we had kind of all of the outputs of the Galton Laboratory, and we have Francis Galton's collections and so on. And we had so much of this information out there. There are also within the museums at UCL, all of the objects that were left to UCL by Galton and linked to this. So some fairly, they spark conversation, but then they're not comfortable objects to look at. I'm just showing the exhibition actually. There on the slide next to it, you can see when we talk about the exhibition later, how we use the building to try and incorporate some of these discussions into what we're doing. We'll shift on to the next slide, please. So this project had several strands of activity. First of all, what we did at the start was co-created engagement projects. So we had 5 of those, which we'll talk about later on. But we worked with community groups and project facilitators there. We also had public art engagement projects. So we worked with UCL's public art team and also some external artist organisations to do a public art response to some of these collections and this history. We also put together a physical exhibition, which was shown in the image just previously, but also a digital exhibition so that we could broaden out some of the things that you necessarily have to shrink in an exhibition. We also funded a research fellowship based on the collections, so specifically to do more academic related thinking around some of those collections. And then we doing various programming around this, events and student placements and so on. Next slide, please. So I'm going to rattle quite quickly through some of these co-creation projects, just so you can get a flavour of the type of thing that was happening. So how this worked is that we put out a brief, we sent a brief out to, well, publicly, and then we had lots of responses. And then from those, we engaged, it was 6, as these things happen. We end up with 5 facilitators who basically engaged with our collections, museums and archives and rare books in varying ways. So you can see that one of them, for example, Jess looked at our education collections, and she was looking at AI and Cyril Burt and IQ testing, and how that kind of thinking has led to the way that our educational system is structured today. So she worked with the Alliance for Inclusive Education, and then we did a series of workshops there with young disabled people, and they were looking at all of these IQ tests, and then they created their own images of ideal bodies and so on using AI and computer generation. All of the reports for all of these projects in depth, by the way, you can see on the website. So it goes into much more detail, and you can see all of the artistic outputs from them all. Next slide, please. Another one that we did was a digital legacy of eugenics. So, and Lila looked at the relationship between photography. She was looking at the composite photographs that we have in the Galton archive, where he's creating an idealized image of a person through layering of photographic techniques, and she was then looking at TikTok, Instagram, and kind of again about idealized images, and then they created a digital showcase. And again, all of these projects have slightly different groups of people working on them, different methodology and different outputs. So some of them have done film, some have done zines, some have done just the workshops and wellbeing. Next slide, please. We also had this project with Alex and Keris, and this was looking at transgender lives and eugenics in museum space. So they were really looking at, in a way, the labelling. They used the Grant Museum, which is a zoology museum, but they were looking at labelling and identifying. And then they did object handling sessions there and art workshops to discuss, how, again, that legacy has shaped current attitudes. Some really beautiful pieces of art there that are in our exhibition. Next slide, please. And then Sol was looking at the pathology collections, and he looked across a few, actually, Galton collection and the art museum, and then he created a film, and he created a zine as well, sort of looking at design really, and how the design of some of those early journals linked into and design now. And next slide, please. And finally, Jasmine looked at eugenics in the body, and she was working with first or second generation migrants and people of colour. But this was a series of 10 wellbeing workshops with people doing movement exercises, which then we've got some poems and some personal reflections that came out of that project, which are just about to go on the website. So next slide, please. So as you can see, a really varied kind of mix of outputs and engagement with different groups. Finally, we have the Words Matter. This was a public art project. And one of the things that came out of inquiry was that they wanted us to do a statue or some other form of public art. And that just didn't, we just couldn't really work out how we were going to do that and where and in what way. So we decided to move it to words and to spoken word and to that kind of project that would allow that kind of interaction that we could then reuse and reflect on and react to. So we worked with the Culture and Community Engagement team at UCL and the Public Art team. And then they worked with a series of external arts organisations. So Brownton Abbey, Cryptic Arts, the New Black Film Collective, and UD Music. We did collection workshops. They did a kind of a showcase thing where they were presenting their initial ideas, and all of those artists then chose to work with UCL, and they are going to be doing an exhibition piece in November this year. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have done 2 exhibitions. It was really difficult to do this actually because we were sort of slap bang in the centre of building works and our usual exhibition spaces weren't available. But actually, we chose to put this exhibition in the UCL Student Centre, which is a big study space. It has about 1,000 study spaces for students. And actually, because about 1.5 million people walk through that a year, it has proved really dramatic, and people sit in there and work in there, and they're sort of in the exhibition. So actually it's been quite interesting. It's not a space that allows for a lot of words. There are too many words potentially. So we've also linked through to a digital workpiece where we've been able to put more films, more reflections, more kind of contextual analysis of the collections and that sort of thing. I'll go to the next slide so we don't run out of time. And really what we have found from this is actually it's a really great way of engaging people with our collections and engaging people with the contested, well, it's not even contested, with the histories of UCL. It starts a conversation. It is really difficult to do. It's challenging. It requires a structure. It requires contextualization, and it requires time. And it requires sort of lots of staff input. So it's hard to do, but it is supremely rewarding. We found that we needed to put in more staff support than we did. I think it's an ongoing thing that we are going to have to support our staff more in being able to go into these sessions with more confidence and also not to suffer. I don't know, it's difficult, it's upsetting. Some of the subjects are challenging. So really, we're aiming to support them the best we can with all of this work that we need to do to make our collections work in this way. I am going to go on to the next slide and show you some links. So if you want to have a look at more any of this work, or indeed have a chat with us, just please do get in contact and please have a look through what we've done. It's an ongoing piece of work. We won't finish the actual project till November, but we're going to try and embed some of this, as Erica will tell you now.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of some of the work that we're currently doing to embed some of those lessons that we're learning. The funding from the 3-year project is running out, so we are putting together a fundraising plan to enable us to continue to work with community groups on some of that reparative action. Another initiative that we are working towards is establishing a community of practice at UCL for people working with so-called difficult or challenging collections. We have also developed some tailored training for staff on teaching with difficult collections, and we've done that in collaboration with another strand of the Eugenics Legacy Project, which is a Eugenics Legacy Education Project, which looked at how to teach eugenics, how to teach about eugenics as part of UCL's programs. And so with them, we developed a tailored training session for collection staff on teaching with on teaching difficult histories with collection items. Next slide, please. We are continuing to teach sessions related to classes related to eugenics. Special collections at UCL and the museums are heavily invested in teaching at UCL. Together we teach over 300 individual classes on a range of UCL programs, and we have taught classes relating to eugenics in programs as varied as the medicine program, the MA in public history, the BASc in information in society, and many more. And so we are embedding recommendations around trauma-informed teaching, for example, building in reflective space for students and staff in those sessions, not letting staff teach those sessions on their own, team teaching, and so on. We are also continuing to embed staff support. As Sarah mentioned, that was one of the key findings, that the emphasis is often on our audiences and our readers, but actually staff working with those collections need support as well. So one of the things that we have put in place so far is a termly safe space meeting for people to just come together and share the work they've been doing around challenging collections and some of the challenges that they've come across. And we are embedding, or we are building all of this activity into the overarching Liberating the Collections program, which is a UCL library-wide initiative to further inclusivity and diversity within our collections and our associated activities. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Erica. Really fascinating. And I was very touched by that point about the support for archival staff working in this area, and I'm sure that's a theme that will resonate with many on this session. So thank you to all our speakers, and now it's time for any questions that colleagues may have. So I'd like to invite all our speakers back onto the call. Thank you. And if I could just sort of take chair's privilege, but perhaps picking up on a theme that was mentioned in Geraldine's talk, we're very much in living in a time where culture wars are intensifying, where freedom of speech, which was referenced in Geraldine's presentation, is something that we need to consider more and more in our work. And reflecting on the position paper, the EDI position paper, where promotion is one of the themes explained in that position paper on how objectives can be applied. So I was thinking, what is there around this whole area of promotion? And we do actually have a question that's been submitted for Geraldine, but I thought perhaps we could open this up into a wider question for the panel. But the question specifically for Geraldine was about deciding how service level statements appeared on the website. So, should these be, a colleague was thinking about particularly about content warnings. Should they be really bold in red messages, or should we take a subtler approach? And I'm just wondering, Geraldine, you may want to answer first, but invite all panelists to reflect on this current environment, what that might mean for promotion of the projects that you've outlined. So yeah, Geraldine, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, we did a lot of benchmarking and research around how the statements could appear and how they could look, and we looked at lots of examples. And I have to say, I saw examples that were quite prominent and some that were more subtle. I think we thought we were putting ours quite upfront. It's at the top. It's there at the top, and it's permanent. It's not. We rejected a suggestion from our web development colleagues. We disagreed with a suggestion that it could be a pop-up. We didn't want that we didn't want it to be something that disappeared. So I think it's I think for us, it was the content has been already agreed. I think we have free rein really to put it where we want. We actually thought we were putting it quite prominently. I mean, I should say we will do, when we've had them, when we've made these live, we can do some kind of get some user testing done. And if it's felt that we could do more to make that the top statement that's currently in grey more prominent, I think we're not worried about doing that. It was more the content of the wording, that we had to work closely or carefully with stakeholders in the university around. We haven't had any particular direction there about how they should look and where we should put them. Does that answer that question? I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Geraldine. I don't know whether other colleagues want to come in on this broader theme of presenting your work, and whether there's any sort of themes, lessons learned, experiences you want to share.
I can. I mean, again, Erica is on the Liberating the Collections steering group, so she can probably speak to it as well. We don't have any steer about. We've done content warnings, and we've also, that Liberating the Collections piece is quite prominent. It's been written about quite a lot and quite publicly, and you know, we've obviously got a big purple exhibition in a massively public space at the moment. So I don't know if we're the right people to ask, but I think I would agree with Geraldine. It took a long time to get that wording, and to get that wording through various people to get all the feedback. And I think that's where the challenge lies mostly. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Erica.
No, I agree with what you've said, Sarah, and I think this work on representation and inclusivity, and so it's been going on for years, and it's kind of only now that the results of that are becoming more visible. But behind the scenes, there's been a lot of strategic thinking that went into that, and a lot of discussions, and so I think we are fairly, robust in terms of what we are showing, what the public facing side is. It's very well thought through.
Thanks. And Holly, any comments on how you're presenting the work of your interns at Leeds? Any discussions you've had there?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the LGBTQ plus intern, I guess one of the past internships I mentioned at the start had focus groups to kind of look at terminology and things in terms of subject tagging. But I guess I've got a little bit I could comment on sensitivity statements in terms of what we're doing at Uni of Leeds too. Because wording, again, I'm just saying what everyone else has said, but we've rethought wording a lot as well. And I think originally our statement said something like may cause offence or may cause distress. And I think we actually had a bit of pushback from that, where maybe people whose collections it is are still around and they're wondering why we think their collections are distressing or offensive. Because we've not only got kind of historic language ones, we've got graphic content warnings and things like that. So it's for a range of material. So we've, changed our wording a few different times. And another thing we did was create a sensitive language policy, which I was just trying to find the link for online, which basically highlights some transparency for the public of what we've done and why, and that we won't get it perfect, but we're kind of continually trying to do it. And if anyone's got any feedback and things like that. And the other little comment I was going to make was that we did do some work in the past with kind of text analysis and flagging records, and we did it with kind of a guinea pig collection. So it now looks like that collection has loads of offensive and distressing things in, because that's the one that we were kind of exploring flagging around. And so the caveats around the fact that we haven't looked at all of our collections, and there's going to be legacy cataloging we haven't flagged. But it's kind of approaching it and getting it into our workflows now. So cataloging going forward, we're using the statements. But I just think that's an interesting thing. We're kind of going back to legacy cataloging. So that was my little statement around that.
Thanks, Holly. That's really helpful. And thanks to you all for your responses to that question. And perhaps we can take a similar approach with the next question that we've had, which is from somebody called Maya. And again, I think aimed particularly at Geraldine, but very perhaps a theme we could explore from others on the panel as well. The question is, we've just created a new exhibition gallery in our main library with its first exhibition set for early 2026. Your examples were so inspiring. I was wondering how you got students involved, as we're keen to do the same. Was it through focus groups, walking workshops, social media, etc.? So I think this broad theme of involving our students in all the different projects, and perhaps just an opportunity for a minute or two just to elaborate on that from the panel. Thank you.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you'd like to speak first, and then invite you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had two students who were working on the Special for Everyone project in a part-time capacity, but dedicated to working on the project. And actually, they were paid for placements. We offered them as bursaries. So I think they gave us 100 hours of work, but this was over 2 years. I think we extended it and they did it for 2 years. I think one of them even did 3 years. And so we actually, because we'd had the sponsorship of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, so we had that sort of buy-in at a higher level, we were able to, the library was fortunate in being able to allocate funding to being able to advertise for those paid placements. And we did that. We advertised and actually did sort of informal interviews for them. So they were actually paid, and we actually prioritised recruiting people who were students who were engaged and interested in the area. So I think that reaped benefits for us.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to? Oh, Sarah.
Oh yeah, I was going to say we did the same thing. So particularly with Prejudice in Power, we had 2 student internships from the science communication degree. So they worked over the summer. They were doing research and looking at specific aspects of that. They were linked into our academic lead on that. They were also involved in the co-creation projects at some levels. They were part of some of those workshops, depending on where the focus was intended to be. And they were also involved in our focus groups. So we've evaluated the project from start to finish, and they were also involved in the feedback aspect of things, which is really helpful, actually. And I mean, Erica probably talk more about the projects with public history at MA students and things like that, but they've been involved in certain aspects of the research around these collections as well.
Mm.
Do you like to come in, Erica?
Yeah, I can do. So, I mean, we have done a lot of collaborative projects, or several, with students that touch on difficult collections, and that's mostly come through the teaching that we do, where we kind of make links with academics who teach on topics related to our collections, and then kind of one thing leads to another and leads to devising student projects and assessed projects together. So we've done a couple of assessed projects with public history students, for example, who developed a series of events looking at the role of women in the Galton Laboratory, and how do you bring nuance to something that's women's history, but that's also the history of eugenics and so on. So we use the contacts that we make through teaching for other things like projects as well.
Thanks, Erica. And Holly, I know your talk was very much about a student internship, but was there anything else you want to say about broader student involvement or engagement around the work that Rosalind's done?
I guess not really. With this being the third of our internships, and we've already got plans for our next one. I think recruitment for that will be happening around now. Yeah, just what Geraldine was saying about having paid opportunities is really good.
Yeah.
I guess we were very lucky to have it, and I was pretty glad to hear we were able to get one next year as well. So yeah, we'll keep doing them as long as we can. And I guess in terms of student involvement in general in special collections, kind of like what Erica was saying, just making the most of those academic contacts and kind of shouting about yourself around the university a little bit, advertising through different schools and the parties in the union and things like that. Yeah, making awareness about cultural collections. That's about it.
Thanks, Holly. So we have just one further question that's been submitted, which is about AI, and does AI, or how does AI allow for changes in language of bias over time? I think, again, this is very much picking up on your presentation, Geraldine. I understand if you say it's a bit too technical for you to answer, but do you want to give a go at answering that one?
Yeah, I think that's quite a technical element of the gender bias project, so I have to make my disclaimer. I can't answer that, but I'm sure Lucy and Ian are both happy to be contacted. I think their contact details are kind of out there anyway, but they'd be very happy to talk about that in more detail. Sorry, I can't answer it today.